Good evening, everybody. My name is A.R. Ghanashyam. Let me welcome you, all of you, the participants for this seminar, Impact of the Ukraine Crisis on the Middle East, organized by the Tillotoma Foundation. The foundation has a special focus both on Eurasian region as well as the Middle East. So this is a topic which is extremely important, not just for the foundation, for the world also at large. It is extremely important because it will have global repercussions, which experts will keep talking about for years to come. In my own capacity as the fellow of Tillotoma Foundation, I am privileged to be a part of this panel discussion. And the members who are participating in the discussion are Dr. Meena Singh, head of the Western Central Asian wing of the Tillotoma Foundation. Then there is Dr. Sujata Ashwarya, associate professor at the Center for West Asian Studies at Jamia, Millia, Islamia, and Professor Jawaid Iqbal from the Department of West Asian and North African Studies of the Aligarh Muslim University. I think the panel is distinguished enough. So I hope that I'll be able to get some thought-provoking ideas from all the three of them. What I plan to do is open the discussion and start with my own remarks on the subject. And then we will have either Professor Iqbal or Dr. Sujata Ashwarya as the next speaker, and whoever is remaining as the following speaker, and of course Dr. Meena Singh to be the final speaker. Then we will conclude the discussion. At the outset, what I wanted to say, I have divided it into three brief capsules. Since the topic is the impact of the Ukraine crisis on the Middle East, there are three actors involved. One is Russia, which invaded Ukraine, and the other one is Ukraine, which is being invaded. And the third is the Middle East, which on whose territory the impact that is going to affect this area is what we are going to discuss. So first and foremost, let us have some basic brief background of each of the actors. Now the first one, before you go into the actors, we need to have some basic minimum background. So let me say the story begins in the early hours of 24th of February 2022, just before about 6 o'clock in the morning, the Russian forces invaded Ukraine. Russia called it special military operations because it was not considered a war according to them. And the main objective of this invasion from Russia was to disabuse Ukraine from its earnest desire to become a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That was the first one. The second objective was to replace Volodymyr Zelensky's government, which has been democratically elected, and replace it with a puppet regime, which is Russia. And the last one is wind up the military operations. The fact of the matter is, possibly the Russian leader thought that this would be a quick dash to Kiev, take over Kiev, and then achieve the objectives and withdraw in a matter of few days or a couple of weeks. But the reality on the ground is that Ukraine has fought on and is continuing to fight, and the objectives have not been achieved. Negotiations are going on, various groups are sitting at various places and are discussing the issues. The United Nations is adopting resolutions after resolutions asking the violence to be ceased and dialogue to be commenced and peace to be pursued. But the fact of the matter is, nothing has achieved much, and the war is continuing. Now come to the three capsules that I was talking about. First is the Russian Federation. Now, what is this Russian Federation? It's the largest country on this planet, 17.1 million square kilometers. It's about 11.5% of the landmass of the whole world, of all the countries put together. That's a huge country. It has a land border of 58,800 kilometers with 16 countries. And it has a coastline of 38,600 kilometers. It's a gigantic country. I mean, it's really unimaginable for smaller countries. But the most important thing is the population of this country is 145 million. So 145 million is about 1.8% of the population of the world. So they are sitting on a land mass of 11.5% and the population 1.8%. And the GDP of Russia is $1.7 trillion. I'm amazed how a country with this kind of a GDP, which is barely half of India's GDP, can exert such power internationally. That is what we have now seen. Now, what is important when we say Russia? Why is it so important? Okay, it's a big country, a large country, that blah blah blah. There are many other large countries which are not as important. The reason why this country becomes important: number one, 30% of the natural resources of the world are in Russia. Number two, it's the owner of the largest proven reserves of natural gas, which is almost a quarter of the entire world's reserves, about 47,798 cubic kilometers. That is supposed to be the value of natural gas which Russia has. And then it's the second largest producer and exporter of oil as well as gas in the world. It's also the custodian of second largest reservoir of coal, 162 billion tons, second only to the United States, which has some 264 billion tons. And Russia is also the third largest producer of wheat. They are only 145 million people. They don't need the kind of production that they do of something like 86 million tons. After China and India, they're the third largest wheat producers. Then we have the second largest defense exporter in the world is also China, also Russia. And it controls, it exports about 20% of the global defense export, which is quite big. And the United States, of course, is the largest with 37%. Russia is the second with 20%. And last but not the least in importance, it's a permanent member of the Security Council. There are only 5 of them, and Russia is one of them. The second actor that we are talking about is Ukraine. And Ukraine is not all that a big country. It has a border with Russia. It's a total area of 603,628 square kilometers, and a population of 41 million, just about comparable to Afghanistan, both in terms of geography, landmass, as well as in terms of area. And this country is also a major producer of wheat. I think it's 4th or 5th largest producer of wheat. And it's also the 3rd largest producer of sunflower oil, about $616 million worth of sunflower seeds oil, which Ukraine has been producing. And Russia is the largest, of course. Between the two of them, they control about 30% of the global production and export of sunflower seed oil. That is so much for Ukraine. Now, the third actor is the Middle East that we are talking about. 18 countries, 7.207 million square kilometers, quite big. It adds up to almost 30% of the Russian geography. And the population is 463 million, little more than that. And the GDP, you will be surprised, of the Middle East, because of rich countries which are involved, like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and all that. The GDP is about $3.88 trillion. We have Bahrain, Cyprus, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Palestine, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. Not all of them are rich, but some of them are very, very rich. Now, the second capsule that we should be coming to. Now, the actors, we know who are the actors. The second is the impact of the Ukraine crisis on the Middle East. There are, in my opinion, 5 domains in which this impact will take shape. One is the food crisis. The other one, the second one, is the oil and gas crisis. And the third one is reduction in the availability of private capital as well as foreign direct investments for the rest of the world, particularly those emerging economies and needy countries with needed aid and assistance. They will have to face some kind of deficit. And the fourth one is the remittances, because a large number of people are working in the Middle East. If the economies are doing very well in those countries, the remittances will increase. If the economies are not doing well, the remittances will decrease. If you have a large community of Egyptians and Jordanians and Palestinians who are spread all over the Middle East as laborers, skilled as well as unskilled, and this crisis will also have an impact on. Then the last one, in my opinion, is tourism. Tourism also will take a break because of the sanctions, non-availability of dollars and non-availability of the Russian tourists may not be available to visit these countries anymore. Now, if you take one by one, the food crisis, or the oil, before you come to the oil crisis. The food crisis, if you look at the area, 2/3 of oil as well as food grain of Syria are imported from Russia. So if Russian wheat is stopped from being exported, the first casualty will be Syria. Lebanon imports 90% of its wheat from Russia or Ukraine. And now both of them are not in a position to export. Lebanon has to find a customer somewhere else. And Yemen imports 40% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine. They also will have to find some other customer, some other source for buying their wheat. And one of the largest importers of wheat in the world is Egypt. Egypt needs about 21 million tons of wheat every year. And that's 86% of their consumption. They import this much. It's an amazing amount. And they imported, so happens, from 2 countries, namely Russia and Ukraine. And all these countries will have to face a lot of music because the international prices of wheat have already gone up. The Egyptian budgeted price was $255 a ton. It is now already hovering around 400. So about $1.5 billion US dollar equivalent money has to be shelled out by the government in the form of subsidy. All these things are going to create problems. That is about the food crisis. And then come to the oil and gas crisis. Those countries in the Middle East who are themselves producers of oil and gas, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Iraq, you have Kuwait, you have even Iran is a part of the Middle East, and you have Qatar. They will have a gala time because they will get a bonanza if the prices go up. Prices have been going up in oil because of COVID for a while. And now the Ukraine conflict has sustained the gradual increase. And unless some alternative products are produced, this is going to become extremely difficult for the world to keep the price of oil very low. These countries, which are oil producers, will have a good time, but oil importing countries will have to bear the brunt of that extra expenditure. Even a country like India will have to suffer immensely because we import almost 80% of our requirement. Then the third point is the diversion of aid and private capital away from the world that it has been in from the Middle East also. What will happen if the Americans are busy trying to rebuild Ukraine and trying to assist the European Union and NATO? The resources which were hitherto being sent and spent in Asia and Africa, they will have to be diverted to Europe and Ukraine. So this is the reason why I say that the Ukraine conflict will influence the flow of funds to many needy countries. And there are countries which have been dependent on aid for a long time, like Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. All these countries will find it extremely difficult to manage. And then, of course, the remittances and tourism are easy to understand. But I have seen that to understand the impact of Ukraine crisis on the Middle East, it is not enough to look at the entire region as a group, because each country has its own peculiar circumstances, its own problems, which are peculiar to it, and it becomes difficult to generalize and categorize them in a single group. So what I have done is I've taken just 4 countries, which are more complex in nature. 4 groups of countries you can see, or one is a pair and the other 3 are independent countries. So I'm going to just talk about these 4. The first one is Saudi Arabia and UAE. Now, both these countries have supported the resolution in the United Nations, but they are not happy to go along with the sanctions on Russia. There are reasons for it. First and foremost, both Saudi Arabia and UAE Emirates are fighting their own war in Yemen. And the Americans were supposed to assist them, and somewhere along the line, the Americans have withdrawn. And both the Saudis and the Emiratis are not happy about it. So if they want to do something more than what is expected, something more than what they actually can do or what the Americans want them to do, then they would like the United States to do something in Yemen also. That is one problem. The second is, ever since the Biden administration has taken over, there has been some effort to improve the relations with Qatar. Qatar is a sworn enemy of the GCC members, both the Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. So it becomes difficult for them. That is the second reason which the people are not very happy about. Then you have Mohammed bin Salman, who is the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, and Mohammed bin Zayed, who is the leader of UAE. They both of them want more assistance and more flexibility on the part of the United States before they agree to the US demand that they increase and enhance the oil production. And they are also giving their own indication. The Saudi Arabians are talking to the Russians, are talking to the Chinese whether they can trade in yuans, replacing the US dollar. This is not something which the Americans will be very happy about. So one other thing, UAE is an open economy, and they are hoping that the Russian oligarchs who have money, who have capital, because of sanctions, they can't go anywhere else easily. So they may be welcomed by Emirates. So that is one more reason why both Saudi Arabia and UAE want to maintain some kind of links on both sides, Russia as well as the United States. So finally, which side they will go to, it's their final decision, and they will take their call when they are satisfied with all the requirements from both sides. Now, the second country that I am taking up is Iran. Iran is a very interesting case because when Israel and the United States were after the Iran, the killing of Qasem Soleimani and all that, they hoped that the Russians would have stood by them. But the Russians did not stand by Iran at that time. So the Iranians remember that. And Iran's biggest interest now is to make sure that sanctions are withdrawn from Iran, as well as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear agreement, is reinstated. They don't want to do, who is the one who is supposed to lead this initiative? The United States. So they don't want to irritate the United States till such time JCPOA finally comes into being. And if you look at the Iranian media, the Iranian elite is also divided. The media also seems to be divided. There is one group of people who say that I think it is Ukraine is a victim, and Ukraine needs to be helped. And the concentration is all on trying to see how Ukraine can be helped. But there's another group which keeps criticizing the Russian invasion. They hold the Russians responsible for the invasion and the problem. That is also an issue. And the Iranians know that who was the beneficiary consequent to the sanctions imposed on Iran? The rest of the oil industry. Certainly, the Russian Federation, which is one of the largest exporters of both oil and gas, they were the beneficiary because of sanctions on Iran. Now, if Iran manages to get the JCPOA reinstated and the sanctions on Russia continue, who will be the beneficiary? This time it will be the Iran which will be the beneficiary. So these are all complications which Iranians have to think through and then finally take their call. It's not going to be easy. Now let's think of Israel. Israel is also an important country there. It has also followed it is one of the 141 members who supported the UN resolution criticizing the Russian invasion. Now, Israel has been requested for arms by Ukraine. So, but Israel has kept away from it. They have not agreed to or supplied any arms. So they don't want to immediately displease the Russians. Why is that? Why are they so worried? Then Russia has many other things which Israel is keen to get its support on. First is Russia can block the airspace on Syria for Israel, which will completely destroy the ability of the Israeli defense forces for any kind of maneuverability in the region. Once the Syrian airspace is closed, there is not much the Israeli Air Force can do. So, and Russia has the control on that lever. So, and Israel doesn't want to get into that kind of a situation. And one last reason why Israel is very keen to be on the side of Russia is just like the UAE, Israel also feels that the oligarchs who have the wealth and the money in Russia, who are unable to invest it anywhere else, including their own country, they might decide to arrive in Israel and take root there. So the Israelis are hoping that that will add a lot of wealth and value to their country. These oligarchs finally land up, even if a few of them, if not all of them, land up in Israel. These are the reasons which Israel is not able to reconcile completely, and that is why they want to maintain some kind of link with both Russia and with the United States, and not fully join either of the two. The last country that I wanted to talk about was which is a little bit more complicated. That is Turkey. Interestingly, that is the only country among the members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization which has not fallen in line with the sanctions regime of the United States and NATO and their allies. And they have still kept the skies open to the Russian aviation. And if you remember, Russia sold S-400 missile defense systems despite a lot of noise that was created among other members of the NATO, that Turkey still managed to buy at a cost of $2.5 billion the S-400 missile defense systems from Russia. It's a different issue that 2 years later, they have still not been operationalized. I've been trying to find out why it is, and I have not been yet able to find out the reason why it is happening. Now, the smartest thing which the Turks are doing, which they think is smart, they have been supplying drones to Ukraine. This is, apart from Germany, Turkey is another NATO member which has been supplying arms to Ukraine. And these drones, they are known to be very effective, and the Russians are facing the music because of these drones. And it is something which the Russians will not be very happy about. And there is, so what the Russians have done, they have blocked the sunflower oil seed oil export to Turkey via the Black Sea. Turkey itself is an importer, is a producer of oil seeds, but then they also import. When this blocking of the Black Sea sunflower seeds from Russia and Ukraine to Turkey is certainly going to affect and increase the prices of edible oil in Turkey, which is not something which they would like. Now, there is one agreement which Turkey and a few other countries have signed in Switzerland, which is called Montreal Treaty, which control the activities of ships in the Black Sea. If you look at the map and expand it and see in the world map, the Black Sea has one small exit, and that is the Bosphorus Dardanelles Strait, which is controlled by Turkey. And if they close that opening, according to the treaty, when there is a war, Turkey can block this strait. But the Russians are saying it is a special military operation. It is not a war. Turkey has not agreed with it, but it has still not exercised this 1936 treaty of blocking the Russian ships, naval ships, at least the warships, because the treaty does not say much about, it does not prevent any movement of cargo and commercial vessels, but then it has clear-cut instructions on movement of warships or naval ships or armed ships and submarines to cross the Bosphorus Strait, and the Russians can use that when it comes. If they do that, Russia will not have exit from Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Now that is a serious issue because you will not be able to do anything with Syria. If you can't go across the Mediterranean, your access to Syria itself will be completely blocked. So Turkey is something which is very important. And Turkey is also hoping that there will be some kind of. So Turkey is as important to Russia.
Yeah.
Sorry. In conclusion, there is no sign of the war either abating or resolving itself. The dialogues that have been taking place in different parts of the world, including in New York in the United Nations, they are not making much of headway. The sanctions have begun, and the sanctions have begun to hurt. And if the war continues and swallows the sowing period for the oil seeds and also the wheat market, you will have a major disruption in the supply of edible oil seeds as well as wheat in the world in the coming year. And the gas pipelines are already rerouting themselves. The Italians have gone all the way to Algeria asking for a new gas pipeline from their side. And the Germans are seriously thinking in terms of getting the oil through other countries, including the Middle East and even Turkey, and by replacing Russia completely. So it is, all these are complex equations which will have their own implications for the rest of the world. And one of the most important aspects of the discussion that I have been noticing on this Ukraine crisis is the tussle between authoritarianism and democracy. You have 5 permanent members of the Security Council. 3 are aligned against 1. France, UK, and the United States are aligned against Russia. And China is sitting on the fence, hedging its bets. But at the same time, they are closer to Russia in terms of their opinions on sanctions, as well as their opinions about what should be done in the future with Russia. The strategic alliance between Russia and China is only going to improve and increase and enhance and expand and deepen and widen. That is a new thing that is going to happen. So you will have possibly, as of now, we have less than 20% of the countries are considered free by the Freedom Index. Then even that percentage may go down. Let me stop at this. I think I may have taken a little more time than I had thought, but then I thought it would be easier to understand. And I'm sure the other speakers would have interesting aspects they will bring about, because I have restricted myself to fewer subjects and fewer countries. And there are many more far exciting happenings in countries in the Middle East, which I sincerely hope the other speakers will touch upon. And I end it here. And now I'm going to request the next speaker. Is it going to be Professor Jawaid? Yeah.
Hello.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ambassador Ghanashyam. Very comprehensive presentation. And I would like to thank the Tillotoma Foundation for giving me an opportunity to take part in this panel discussion. In fact, Ambassador Ghanashyam has covered almost the whole canvas of issues that have been affecting the Middle East as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I would like to touch upon some more peripheral issues which has impacted the Middle East in one way or the other. Besides the issues that have been taken up by Ambassador Ghanashyam, the first thing that I would like to briefly touch upon is the issue of Syrian fighters who are being recruited by both Russia as well as Ukraine. Now, this might seem surprising that Syrians are being recruited by both sides. Actually, during the Syrian civil war, Russia, after a long period of hibernation, started taking a proactive foreign policy interest in the Middle East. Prior to the Syrian civil war, Russia had virtually receded from the Middle East. It was the Americans who were calling the shots, be it the Iraq war, be it support for Israel, be it the collapse of the Libyan state. Russia was nowhere on the scene. It was only with the start of the Syrian civil war that we see a resurgence of Russian interest in the Middle East. Not only a resurgence, but an active participation in Middle Eastern affairs. In fact, the Assad regime today owes its existence to the total support that it received from the Russians. Had it not been for the Russian armed forces and Russian military support, I think the Assad regime would have collapsed long back. Now, having said that, the Russian intervention in the Syrian civil war, on the one hand, it led to the shoring up of the Assad regime. On the other hand, it created an anti-Russian sentiment in a section of the Syrian population, particularly the jihadi elements. Now, these jihadi elements are sought to be recruited by the Ukrainian side. And the pro-Assad forces, they have come out openly in support of the Russian invasion. Hence, we might see a scenario whereby a few weeks from now, Syrians would be found on both sides of the conflict, some fighting for the Ukrainian and some fighting for the Russian state. This is one important aspect. The second important aspect to which Ambassador Ghanashyam referred to is Iran. Now, Iran is using this conflict to buttress its negotiating position vis-a-vis the United States as far as the Iran-US nuclear deal is concerned. This is one aspect. The second aspect is, in order to get around the sanctions, Iran is very happy that oil prices are rising and it is willing to sell oil to the Western powers. In fact, we have seen newspaper reports that the Americans have even approached Venezuela for supply of oil in lieu of the Russian oil. So Iran is now trying to leverage its position vis-a-vis selling oil as well as the Iran-US nuclear deal. How far Iran will be successful and how far the Western powers will support the Iranians in its actions, we will get to know in the days to come. But it has given Iran an opportunity to assert itself at the global stage, because since the time Trump had reneged on the Iran-US nuclear deal, Iran was reeling under the impact of sanctions. Now, coming to the third aspect of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its impact on Middle East, I would briefly like to touch upon Israel and Israel's policy. Israel finds itself in a bind, whether it should openly support the Russian invasion, whether it should go along with its Western allies, particularly the Americans, and support the Ukrainians, or whether it should take a neutral stand. Israel has been trying to play the role of a mediator or a negotiator as far as the conflict is concerned. In fact, the Israeli Prime Minister has time and again offered his services to act as a mediator in the conflict. This it does because it would not like to antagonize the Russians as far as the Middle East is concerned, because it has already seen in the case of Syria, a regime which the Israelis detest has been showed up by the Russians over the last 7 years or so. And if Russia starts taking a more active interest in the Middle Eastern affairs, then Israel has the Palestinian problem to contend with. The Palestinian problem, which has receded to the background, and virtually they have been virtually forgotten by the international community. A sudden Russian interest in the Palestinian problem would once again create new challenges for Israel, particularly in the UN and particularly in the occupied territories, which have been largely ignored by the Western world and by the international community. Hence, Israel is trying to play the role of a mediator without antagonizing the Russians. And as Ambassador Ghanashyam pointed out, it has refused to supply weapons to the Ukrainians, despite President Zelensky's repeated appeal to come out in support of the Ukrainians. The fourth aspect, which I would briefly like to touch upon, is the question of refugees. Now, the refugees, they have not impacted Middle East in any significant way, except the fact that Ukrainian Jews have been airlifted from neighboring countries like Poland and Hungary to Israel. Apart from that, the whole refugee issue is tinted in a very racial color. We have read reports how the West is trying to help out with the refugee problem. But if we go back a few years, say 5 years back, a similar refugee crisis, though of a smaller magnitude, was created during the Syrian civil war. Now, these Syrian refugees, when they arrived in Europe, the kind of reception that they received from the NATO countries and the kind of reception that the Ukrainian refugees are receiving from the same NATO countries, there is a hell of a difference between the two kinds of reception. This will not go down well with the global South, because it reeks of some kind of a racial arrogance, some kind of a racial partiality. Since the Ukrainians are white, blonde, so the Europeans have absolutely no problem in throwing open the door for refugees which are coming in from Ukraine. It's very good that these refugees are being given very good treatment. But the refugees from Middle East or from other parts of the world who have been trying to flee conflict, who have been trying to flee economic deprivation, they also deserve to be given, if not the same treatment, at least something on par with what the Ukrainians are receiving. So this is sadly lacking on the part of the NATO countries, and this will not go down well as far as the Arab population is concerned, as far as the Middle Eastern population is concerned. And coming to the fifth aspect of this conflict, Ukraine, I may add, has not been very popular in the Arab world and in the Muslim world in general. Why? Because Ukraine far-right groups in Ukraine have of late become very powerful and dominant as far as the Ukrainian politics is concerned. Though Ukraine is a democracy and President Zelensky has tried to distantiate himself from the far right, yet Islamophobia is a fact in Ukraine, which is not the case with Russia. Hence, by and large, if you feel the pulse of the Arab masses, I think the masses in the Arab world are more with the Russian stand rather than with the Ukrainians. Though the regimes might differ as to whom to support, but even among the regimes, we see that Saudi Arabia and UAE, they are not willing to toe entirely the Western line or the American line. They are also trying to negotiate and find benefits for themselves in the midst of this crisis. Saudi Arabia in particular, because Joe Biden had maintained a distance from the Saudi Crown Prince and US due to the murder of Turkish journalist. Now it sees in the Ukrainian crisis an opportunity to assert his authority within the country as well as with the United States. Hence, suddenly the Americans are finding that the Arabs have found a voice of their own. They are trying to renegotiate the terms of engagement with the Western powers. In a way, the change in the geopolitics of the region is welcome, because till now it was America which was giving the narrative as far as the regional politics is concerned. But right now, with an assertive Russia and assertive China, the Arab powers, particularly the oil powers, as well as the Arab masses, they are finding a new voice in international relations, which was lacking since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s. Hence, by and large, the conflict in the region, between Russia and Ukraine, has come as a new kind of force that is emerging in international politics, and the geopolitical architecture of the region, Middle Eastern region, is bound to change as a result of this conflict. Now, with these few points, these 5 points, because most of the other points have been very well covered by my previous speaker, I would like to bring my submission to an end. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Jawaid Iqbal. I must say that some of these things which you mentioned were very, very new, and I had not even thought over it, like the division, the Syrians fighting on both sides, one on the Ukrainian side, the other one on the Russian side, and then the Iranians trying to play safe, of course, is somewhat understood. And the fact that if Russia starts opening up issues on Palestinian, that is another thing which could make a big dent now. And the fact about this racial color of refugees was also new, but it's maybe just going to pick up now. And and the Islamophobia of Ukraine versus lack of it in Russia was something which I was not aware. That was information for me. And you are absolutely right when you conclude that the single bully world is now being replaced by a less powerful bully and a more amenable alternative in Russia. So it's quite an interesting thing which you finally concluded. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Iqbal. And now I am going to invite Professor Ashwarya. The floor is yours, Professor Ashwarya. Now,
I've heard both the speakers, and I'm going to put a perspective to all your information, so to say. Now, needless to say that the actors in the region, in the West Asian region, have responded in a complex, multifaceted way to the Ukrainian crisis or the Russia-Ukraine war. while globally we see that the war has brought NATO and EU closer together in coordinating their collective responses, it is worth noting that the regional actors, there has been mixed regional responses among the countries in the Middle East, for whom the war can have a long-term debilitating effect, and that is a crucial aspect of all of this, of the unfolding of their responses to the war. So I'm adopting two different but interrelated perspectives, and my teaching and my research on IR theory will come into play. I'm adopting two theoretical perspectives to understand the varied, multifaceted, complex responses of the regional actors. I adopt first the role theory, and second, the transactional perspective on alliances. So the role theory generally focuses on three elements. One is the ego dimension, that is the actors, any actor, any international actor, and it's always in the, from a realist perspective, it's always the state. Has certain perceptions, beliefs, and regarding the international system of anarchy, you can say, and about its own suitable conduct in international relations. So that is the role conception. Second is the role expectation. That is, it denotes the explicit or implicit expectation that another actor places upon on an actor. And third is the role performance. That is the perceptible foreign policy actions of a country. It refers to the actual foreign policy behavior of a state when acting on the world stage, encompassing the attitudes and action it takes to implement those foreign policy actions. So I consider this a very helpful framework to understand the varied and multifaceted response. Why do Gulf countries balance their relations with Russia and the US? Why do they want to be neutral? Why do they want to be seen as neutral? You can say they did this and they did that, but why did they do that? You have to go behind the curtain. So I consider role theory as a very, very helpful framework to understand. And if we use this framework, we can analyze a lot of contradictory responses or we can frame or put into perspective a lot of contradictory responses. And both my previous speakers have talked about the varied and complex, multifaceted responses of the actors, of the regional actors. Now, another perspective that I want to adopt is the transactional perspective. By this, we mean that leverage gained in one area can be useful for influencing another area in order to secure narrow interest in times of war or crisis. So if Russia has leverage in energy sector, it uses that to secure national interest with the Arab countries in OPEC plus or with say important global players like China and India. So this makes alliances in international politics soft, flexible, shifting, ephemeral. They are fluid. They go in, actors move in, move out easily, depending on their narrow transactional interest, you can say. Now, the same two countries may be closely aligned on, and through this perspective, one can understand why two countries may be closely aligned in one setting, but can be on the opposite side in another setting. So, now, the response of the Middle Eastern countries or the West Asian countries are driven by how they view themselves in their relations to the West, the US in particular, and other global powers, as well as the opportunities and the opportunity cost resulting from the war. Now, since many of these countries are authoritarian, the lack of deference to domestic political opinion in many countries allows them the nimbleness, the dexterity to pursue narrow national interest. Now, this cannot happen in a democratic country, not even in our country. So to begin with, I have to say that voting in the UN General Assembly or the Security Council does not entirely reflect the complexity of the situation. There are countries that support Russia. We know Syria supports Russia completely. Countries that oppose the invasion of Ukraine, not necessarily oppose Russia on various issues, such as Lebanon, and there are a group of countries in the region which are trying to appear as neutral as possible, namely UAE, Saudi Arabia. Now, Iran is an outlier, and I think if I have time, I'll talk about Iran as well. So while Syrian vote in the UN General Assembly was unsurprising, of course, because Syria is firmly on the side of Russia, other West Asian countries have been trying the balancing act, with many voting against the Russian position and yet trying outside the UN to figure out how to balance their narrow national interest or requirement, needs, or whatever you want to call it, and their international alliances, allegiances, etc. So let's take begin with, because it's the easiest. Let's take the case of Syria. Now, Syria and Russia have interdependent relationship ever since Russia intervened to support the Assad regime in Syria in 2015. Now, Russia is dependent on Syria to maintain the Tartus base in the Mediterranean, and which gives Russia access to warm waters of the Mediterranean. Now, every landlocked country, now Russia is not completely landlocked, but all the northern ocean on its north is frozen. So it does not have access to the warm waters of the Mediterranean or other great oceans. So it's foreign policy. If you look at the geopolitics of Russia, you will, historically, you will see that Russia always wants, a Russian geopolitics is geared towards having a say in the Mediterranean, to have access to the warm waters, the sea lanes of communication, etc. And recently we have seen Turkey exercising its prerogative under the Montreux Convention of 36, I think, 36, and closed the Bosphorus and Dardanelles. Now, last time the Bosphorus and Dardanelles were closed was during the Second World War. But it did that to certain Russian ships, not all, but to ships that are purportedly carrying war material, etc. And so you have Russian geopolitics playing in that part of the region. Now, so Russia and Syria, of course, have now interdependent relation, and Syria, in its own conception of the world, considers itself a much battered state, which is supported absolutely by Russia, and it wants to return the favor. So you have Syria on the Russian side completely. Now, as you go down the latitude, you come to Israel. Now, Israeli rule conception is that of an island of, the most important national rule conception is of an island of stability in the turbulent region of West Asia. It is a progressive modern nation that is willing to share the fruits of its development, its achievement with the neighbors. And with Abraham Accord, Israel has Israel views itself as a peacemaker, as a mediator, as an alliance builder, and even a security provider. So, but there are transactional elements as well that come into play in the context of Russia, Russia's war in Ukraine. And now, even though over the past years, Ukraine has gone out of its way to, quote Israel, such as recognizing Jerusalem as as Israel's capital, even as Ukraine is seeking EU membership, and EU does not recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. So, but Mr. Zelensky has made that effort. So, but Israeli concerns are not, and if you look at the Israeli responses to the war, its concerns are not geared towards Ukraine. Of course, there are humanitarian concerns. It has set up field hospitals, brought in Jewish and other refugees to Israel. But in terms of geopolitics, Israel's concerns are more complex and go over and beyond Zelensky's invocation of the Holocaust and invocation of his Jewish ancestry. Now, now Israel wants to, in terms of geopolitics, Israel wants to maintain its long-term alliance with the US. Yet it is not willing, and notably not willing, to be seen entirely on the side of America. And now has taken the initiative to serve as the mediator in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Nonetheless, Israel also understands the need to preserve its unsaid relations, or not unsaid, understanding with Russia as far as the Syrian theater is concerned. So, and Russia understands. So, Israel frequently violates Syrian territory and bombs Iranian troop movement or Iranian weapon warehouses, etc., etc. So that and the cover for all these operations are provided by Russia. So Israel wants to keep its northern border absolutely safe from any sort of attack by Syria or Syrian, many terror outfits operating in Syria. And Russian support is imperative to its security interest in the northern border. And that's the reason why, that's one of the reasons why Israel does not want to antagonize Russia in any way, and is playing a balancing act. And that is the narrow interest that has come into play in the context of the war. Now, there is also the complexity of the Jewish population in Ukraine. Israel's, conception of being safeguarding the well-being of Jews, or being a home to Jews all over the world. So, but again, Israel does not want to share the Iron Dome. It does not. It is irked over Zelensky invocation of the Holocaust in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, and Zelensky's understanding of the Holocaust. So. Geopolitics and national role conception, etc. Now, both overlap, intersect to fabricate an Israeli response, which is more complex than merely balancing, which is more complex than being on the side of the US or being on the side of Russia, and finally, Israel also does not want, is very about speaking out too loudly against Russia's invasion of Crimea, because Prime Minister Bennett and even the former Prime Minister Netanyahu had advocated annexation of the West Bank Prime Minister Bennett believes in annexation of the West Bank. So his anti-annexation credentials are not too high. So, in fact, Israel would like to downplay the conflict as much as possible because it reflects poorly also on its own occupation. The refugee crisis created by its occupation of West Bank and Gaza, and the historical dispossession and dispersal of Palestinians after the 1948 war. The war in Russia and the talk about occupation of Ukraine by Russia does not really go down well with Israeli understanding of its own role in the region, or understanding of its own interest or narrow national interest in the region. Now I'll talk about another country, and then I'm going to close because my previous two speakers have talked about UAE and Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to talk about Turkey, which I believe is important. It's a very important player. Again, Turkey, like Israel, perceives itself as a centrally located, modern, and progressive nation, which has managed to keep authoritarianism at bay. So Turkey would rather be called a democratic country rather than an autocratic or an authoritarian country, although there are strong signs that Turkey is, if not authoritarian, strongly autocratic. Now, on the international arena, it wants to be seen as a power that can act independently, that can stand up to the US, and at the same time is also humane, is a humane power, is concerned about the welfare of humanity, is a power which goes beyond the narrow geopolitical interest. That is all part of Turkey's national role conception. For instance, it has given refuge to 3 million Syrians who have fled the war in the past decade. And it wants to be seen as a country which is strong, which is very comfortable under its own skin, and which can withstand pressures from Western powers. So in the past 10 years, you see Turkey asserting its Asianness, or asserting its Asian roots more than its European entanglements or alliances or allegiances. So similar to Israel, Turkey seeks to promote its role as the potential mediator in the conflict. And it is evident from the early March meeting, I think March 10th meeting between Russia's foreign minister and Ukrainian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov and Dmitry Kuleba met in Antalya. They could have met in Istanbul, but it is so fitting to meet in Antalya. Antalya is supposed to be a very popular city with Ukrainians, with the Central Asian republics, as well as the Ukrainians and Russia. Now, all of these countries do not have access to the warm waters of the ocean. So people of these countries love the ocean, and Antalya is situated at on the Mediterranean coast. And so that to create a salubrious, familiar environment for both the players, for Ukraine and Russia, the Antalya was chosen as the site for peace talks. Now, Turkey is a very important player also because it is a NATO member and an interlocutor, and has been able to establish within a span of just 4 weeks as an interlocutor to both warring parties, and is seen as being in a unique position to talk to both the parties. And this was evident when President Erdogan received a call from President Putin outlining Russia's condition for any eventual peace deal. That was, I think, last week on 17th of March. So, and again, days later, it found itself facing the pressure from the US to send Russian-made S-400 to Ukraine, a move that would have undermined Turkey, a move that would have undermined Turkey's self-conception as a strong power that can withstand pressure of a global so-called imperialist or a global superpower. So, Turkey, of course, refused, just lay quiet and let the talk just pass and fizzle out. Now, Turkey's position is also complicated by its need to have Russian support to keep the Kurdish population of Syria in check. So this is the narrow transactional interest of Russia as far of Turkey as far as Russia is concerned. So again, to prevent the Syrian regime from making any advances in Idlib, which is the last stronghold of the rebel group which rebelled against Assad. So you see that in Syria, Russia is playing such a crucial balancing role between among regional powers. On one hand, it provides cover to the to Israeli bombardments of Iranian positions. On the other hand, it also gives cover to Turkey to act against against Kurdish Kurdish rebels in the northern part of Syria. So it is a complex, complex arena where different regional actors pursue their narrow transactional interest. Now, also Turkey needs Russia to control Assad, so that no, more refugees do not flow out of.
Professor Ashwarya, if you can conclude, please.
I'm saying the last line, please. So, so it also needs Assad to keep control over President Assad, so that he does not indulge in any violence against population, which can create another refugee crisis for Turkey. So all in all, what I'm trying to say that the responses of various actors here, the contradictory responses of various actors can be understood if we adopt the perspectives, or a combination of the perspectives of national role conception that create a bunch of responses, or particular responses of a regional actor, as well as the transactional theory or transactional perspective, which help us understand why a state or why a regional country would respond in a certain manner, in a certain circumstance, and why it would respond in a different manner in a different circumstance. It helps us, these two perspectives help us to go beyond the curtain and see the forces acting upon, and contradictory forces and multifaceted forces acting upon each actor in the region. And these forces come to fore during a crisis, a global crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ashwarya. About it, suffice it to say that you started it beautifully and ended it also very well. And now I'm going to request Dr. Meena Singh Roy.
Thank you, sir. It's always pleasure to be in the panel chaired by you. You have the practical, knowledge about how it is implemented, how the policies are implemented. And as you said, I'm the last speaker, so it's both challenge and an opportunity, because you don't have to speak much. Since we are looking at the implications of the Ukraine-Russia war, or we call it a military intervention, whether we call it an invasion, those are nomenclatures. But the fact of the matter is that there is a conventional war which is ongoing. And therefore, for me, I think three important points that I'll try and cover, because we've heard the theoretical dimensions, we've heard the geoeconomic implications, and in between is the the military dimension of it and the lessons that we have to learn from this. And lastly, what is the future? How international community and the countries are going to probably act depending on what lessons they have learned from these military interventions. So if we look at the implication part of it, and I think the implications would vary depending on the size and shape and how much they can observe, basically be able to sort of take that economic implication of it, how much they are able to bear, or how much they are able to basically see to it that they try and neutralize the maximum negative part of the implications. So when we say implications, there are three categories that I look at. First is the geopolitical, second is the strategic, the security dimension, and the third is the geoeconomics. The geoeconomics part of it, Ambassador Ghanashyam, you covered it beautifully, and you covered almost all the sort of sectors or domain that you talked about, barring one particular aspect where the debate today. You talked about energy, you talked about food security, you've talked about foreign direct investments. And I think I agree with each and every aspect that you have talked about. Refugees have been talked about. Remittances, again, I would say certain countries will be more affected than the other ones. So there would be, I guess, different categories of countries and how this is going to impact them. But one particular point which I feel that is being debated is the financial wars. Financial war, in a sense, they are talking about the pro-dollar bloc and the anti-dollar bloc. So I think that is the very interesting aspect, and we need to be watching it very carefully. There may be countries who would be in the pro-dollar bloc, whereas the others may be in the anti-dollar bloc, but will, Chinese take full advantage of. Now, I think that is something which we need to watch. Although I am not one of those believers and I'm not an economist in that sense, but you do see, we've seen trade war. So I won't be surprised if we see this financial war of two blocks. And there would be countries we will see, and India has already indicated to that extent, we are not going to, sacrifice our core interest. And I don't think any one of us. What will happen in future, we'll have to be very, very careful. Predicting something is really difficult at this stage, because I feel the war, as you said, that war is continuing. We don't know how this is going to shape up, but I do feel that it cannot get prolonged. Maybe in a month's time, we should be hopeful of something that might work out. So that is one aspect that I felt as far as the geo-economic dimension of it is concerned. One more point where I would like to probably raise is the technology and how military sort of is going to look at the usage of the weapons. If we look at Russia's intervention in Syria and in the Middle East, and how Russia emerged as a major player, and which used these countries as the country where probably they displayed the strength of their military equipment. And if you look at the arms sales of Russia, they really went up after that. Now, is that going to be repeated now? I have my doubts, because nobody is a winner or a loser in this. I think everybody is a loser. And in particularly, we did hear about the expectations. So when we're looking at the military and the dimension of it, the key question that comes to the mind is, what are the lessons that we need to learn? We know there are no solutions to the problem when you militarily intervene. That is, I think, time and again, the world has been exposed to the military interventions. We have seen these operations on some ground or the other, but I don't think anybody would agree that, it brings in the desired results to either the country which is intervened, or of course the destruction which the country suffers, on which we have the military, war imposed on. So the lesson which the military has to learn is that we need to try and protect. Unfortunately, in this war, United States, to an extent, I would say, without, actually, fighting a single bullet, has been able to achieve, in projecting Russia, which it sees as a major enemy, I would say, and particularly Putin, not the country as such, but I think it is Putin. So the image of Putin has definitely been damaged, either through social media or through what everybody is watching. How this is going to impact the development within Russia is a very, very important factor. In strategic terms, I think, China has we see when we talk about the balance of power, when we talk about how, diversification has been the major, policy of the country. I think that all of you have talked about how each country, so I'm not getting into the specific countries, we know they have reacted in a different way, but we also need to understand that in future, three things are going to be very, very important as to how the strategic fallout is going to be of this. First is when we talk about the limitless friendship of China and Russia. That is something, how that is going to be, for me, it is going to be questionable. If China-US relations are China is, we saw the Chinese foreign minister sitting here in India today. But I think everybody is watching how, China-US relations are going to be shaped up, to what extent China is going to fully support Russia in this kind of a situation. China is also wanting to have a clean image, yet, it wants to challenge the United States. What happens to the Chinese greater, integration game? Sir, you talked about the impact of the FDI. You talked about the larger changes in the global economy and how it is going to be affecting the major, countries in terms of pumping in money in major projects. So what will happen to the China's BRI project? And I think there's going to be a global impact of this. So that dimension needs to be taken into account. As far as the Middle East is concerned, we will have to, there are going to be short-term, medium-term, and long-term impact. There is no doubt, as long as the war is on, we will see the oil prices going up. We will also see, as you said, the food security. We also see the rising cost of it, but the medium-term impact will be something for which each country needs to be prepared for. And this is where I think, the diplomacy has to be very, very aggressive. It has to be very, very pragmatic. And that is where the role of countries like, India and even Iran and Israel and China and Russia, we need to, Japan, I would include here, as well. So we need to see how the diplomacy is going to be played out in this respect in the larger countries. But as far as the Middle East countries are concerned, we do see, major regional order which is reshaping today, and it is driven by many factors, which lot of which people have already talked about. So I think for India, it is the time to talk about. We have talked about you have OPEC plus to the producing countries, but I think the consumer countries need to come together. There could be an informal meeting between the consumer countries. So when we are looking at these major challenges that we've talked about in the geoeconomic aspect, we need to think about options. We need to think about, the way, this can be managed in a better way. So, I mean, what is the future? I mean, how India is going to be affected, and India is going to set its course of action in future. And this is, I think, the main concern for us. India should take full advantage of the intermediate time when we can secure more oil, even if we have to buy at a low cost from them. If it is offered by Iran, if it is offered by Russia, we need to make full advantage of that. We also need to see that we probably have more diplomatic engagement bilaterally with all the Middle East countries. But I don't see a major challenge in terms of our bilateral relationships individually with the West Asian countries. That is pretty strong. We are placed in a very unique sort of situation where we will be, I am 100% sure that we will be able to at least protect our interests, given the approach that we have taken so far. And I think the only option for us is to be having a neutral approach to the problem. We can't sacrifice our relations with the United States. We can't do it as far as Russia is concerned. This is where I think the geography comes into play. So we need to ensure that we follow the neutral policy approach while we are looking at a problem which is still unfolding. What will happen to Russia and what will happen internally in Russia, I think is a very, very key question that we need to be debating about. There's not much information coming at the moment. There's filtered information that we are getting. It will also, probably set the course of the global sort of order that we are looking at, depending on how strong Russia will continue to be after this war. That, I think, is a key question here. Europe has definitely been affected, and as you said, there is going to be major kind of flow of money in reconstruction of Ukraine and also managing the refugee crisis in Europe. So that is given. To what extent the other countries, the other Asian powers collectively will be able to manage the global economy, that I guess will decide as to how serious the economic implications are going to be for the region specific. Whether it is Africa, whether it is Middle East, whether it is Asian parts of it. So we need to probably get into a phase of working towards the economic diplomacy today. But the first and the primary probably effort has to be on trying and convincing Russia to probably stop this war. I hope this happens fast for us. So I think, sir, I'll stop here, and we'll see how because it is a situation of uncertainty and unpredictability. So the real-time implications are only going to be seen as we go along, and how the international community deals with it. Just one point on the effectiveness of the United Nations. I think that has also been question to what extent UN would be able or has been able to stop such wars. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meena Roy. I must say that the idea of the division of the world between the dollar economy and the non-dollar economy was something very, very interesting, because people are talking about it, and there is also a lot of debate going on the digital currency aspect of it. So you don't know, we might see in our own lifetime that it will be a new kind of currency the world will come out with, which is neither a dollar, nor a yuan, nor a ruble, nor anything else. But I suppose it will take a while. But the second point that I took take away from this thing is that the impact of the oil and gas imbroglio that is now happening might give a fillip to the electric vehicle market. So unless, of course, the electric vehicles are being charged by power which is generated by oil or gas, then this is a vicious circle. And finally, on the aspect of its impact on India, it's a separate subject and a new topic, and a new debate would have to be initiated for it. So let me thank you also for an excellent presentation that you gave. And I should also, on behalf of the foundation, thank all the speakers, both Professor Ashwarya and Professor Jawaid and Dr. Meena Singh. And I think we have made a reasonably good collage of our ideas in this debate. And if someone can put it in a piece of paper, I think it will add up to something which is useful. And here I come to an end of my tenure as the chairman of the session. So I'm going to thank the foundation and hand over the floor to you, Dr. Meena Singh Roy.
Thank you, sir. I think this is an unending debate when we are talking about a very, very complex and serious matter of conventional war, which is ongoing, and the implications. But
thank you very much for your valuable insights on the matter. My question is to Dr. Ashwarya. You briefly mentioned about the domestic public opinions and how they often do not play a role in the decision-making process of these regimes. But my question is that because we now have entered a new information era, do we see any information that is coming from the population of these countries and what their stance is, or there's nothing at all?
Even if domestic public opinion in Gulf countries, which are authoritarian countries, differ from the line of the regimes of the government, what recourse do people have? You know, at best they can go on social media, vent out a few very measured contrary opinion. That's all. You need a robust press, you need robust institution, democratic institution, you need a robust independent and robust press to be able to influence the government, which is sadly lacking in Middle Eastern countries, except for Israel. So domestic public opinion do play a role. They play a role in democratic countries in shaping or in directing in shaping the direction of a policy or a foreign policy on a foreign policy question. But in authoritarian regimes, so that kind of space is extremely restricted and limited. So I'm sure people think differently. People have varied opinions, and people on the street might not agree with what the rulers are doing. But apart from making some comments on social media, what else can they do? And so, yes, that is the difference in democratic countries, or in countries where there is more democracy than the Middle Eastern or Gulf countries. you would see domestic public opinion pressing upon the decisions of the government. But in Middle Eastern countries, I don't see that. I mean, I do read contrary opinions on Facebook, but they are all very measured. They are all very, very measured. You know, any contrary, on any outright contrary opinion can land you up in jail. And we all know that activists and have been in jail and have been incarcerated in Gulf countries for a long time, and that is a fact. So public opinions can influence people only when there is a democratic space, when institutions are robust and there are channels of political communication open to the people. And that is not the case in Gulf countries.
Thank you so much, Professor. My final question is to Professor Iqbal. Professor, you mentioned two very important aspects. The first is the racial issue of Syrian refugees versus the Ukrainian refugees. And second, you mentioned about Islamophobia. How big do you think these can become reasons for the Gulf countries to not support Ukraine on platforms like the UN?
Professor Ashwarya just now pointed out the futility of any dissenting opinion in the Gulf countries. By and large, we have seen that all the 6 Gulf countries which are monarchies, they have been following policies which are in consonance with the Western world. Whatever the Americans or Europeans decide for them, these policies are implemented. This is the first time that we see some kind of a difference of opinion between the United States and Saudi Arabia, and that too on an issue which had at one point of time put MBS in a tight spot. That is the murder of the Saudi journalist. Now, Saudi Arabia, or for that matter even UAE, they will try to use this conflict to reassert their position vis-a-vis the Americans or the Europeans. It's not in the greater interest of the nation that they will take a pro-Ukrainian or a pro-Russian policy. They will, whatever policies they will adopt, it will be in the interest of the regime or the monarchy. So we cannot expect them to really act in the interest of the nation as such, or in the interest of the people, because the survival of the monarchy is the prime interest of these crown princes in the Gulf. If you even look at Qatar, if you look at the broadcast of Al Jazeera, you will never find a single criticism against the Qatari monarch. Though Al Jazeera, the standard of journalism is much better than what we have in the region. But nevertheless, Al Jazeera always pays obeisance to the Qatari regime.
The question relates to India's position and how India has been pushing the Make in India and diversifying defense procurement policies. In the era of multi-front warfare, which also includes information warfare, what should India's approach be towards the dominance, the monopoly of big social media players in India?
In India is a very different, proposition, but it is very much relevant when we are talking about the Middle East as such, because we have a new Middle East pod which is only being discussed, but in practical terms, we have to see the forward movement on it. So there, I guess, the whole thing of Make in India can work out in terms of the cooperation between Israel, UAE, India, and the United States. It could be joint projects that one can look at. So this is an idea which I feel will probably work out in future. There is already understanding between all the 4 countries to go ahead. Even, I mean, if we don't look at the quadrilateral, we do see that India, UAE, and Israel can as well work towards it. India, Israel, and UAE are already working on their in terms of producing the cleaning of the solar panels. I mean, you need a kind of an instrument which cleans the solar panels. You require it in the Middle East because the sand settles on that. So there is already some kind of a trilateral mechanism which is working towards these things, and subsequently I do see some kind of an arrangement and opportunity for India to work with these countries collectively, whether we call it defense or we call it an equipment which would be helpful or in demand as far as the Middle East is concerned. And in fact, I'll include the North Africa as well in this. I hope I have probably clarified it. Okay. So I only am left with the duty of thanking everybody for making those valuable contributions. And as far as Middle East is concerned and the war in Ukraine is concerned, I think no single country will be left out in terms of the implications that we would see in various sectors, particularly in the 5 to 6 domain that we have already discussed in the context of the impact on the food security. And I would rather, add many more areas and the sectors which would be coming up subsequently as we see unwinding of the war in Ukraine, and how directly or indirectly all of us are going to be impacted with it. My own, research on the sanction has been that, sanctions have never been able to deliver the full results on the country that you impose sanctions. Will Russia be able to sustain it? I would say in the short term, Russia will be able to sustain it. Can we completely ignore Russia, or can Russia be kept out of the global system, whether we're talking about the wheat, whether we're talking about the food security, whether we're talking about the rare, minerals and metals that are strength, and even in terms of oil and gas, and mainly the gas, which is the key component of Russia's, revenue generation. And to what extent the Asian actors who do need, these, energy resources and other minerals will find a way to probably engage Russia. It actually depends on how effective these sanctions would be in future. And I think that probably will set the course of the negative impact of the sanctions that would start rolling very soon. But from my own point of view, I don't think Russia can be completely kept out of it. Despite the fact that the Europeans have been talking to the Qataris, Europeans have been talking to other countries, and the US trying to help them out, there is going to be a phase where it would be very, very difficult for them to sustain. And therefore, I think oil and gas, probably the energy resources, will continue to be kept out in terms of the sanctions till they find the alternative source of it. I don't think we will see the complete shutting doors on Russia. As I said, how Russia and China are going to shape the regional and the global order will also is a big question, and whether it is going to be a limitless friendship, and I think that again is going to be conditioned by the China's own, image building, which it wants to sustain and enhance its economic influence, and at the same time, at strategic level, the Middle Eastern countries are going to try out their multi-vector foreign policy. They would want to have options, options open as far as their future economic engagement and political engagement, and also protecting their core strategic interests. So they would very much probably continue to be in the American camp. I don't see that the US is in a complete withdrawal kind of a scenario. Its interest might get diversified, in that sense, but we will see a very different world in coming years. And that probably is going to be driven by the trends that we see unfolding today in every domain, whether we talk about economics, whether we talk about science and technology, whether we talk about the financial sector, where dollar or anti-dollar or cryptocurrency, how these things are going to shape the new world, the new ways of doing trade with each other. I think those are the uncertainties which we can see at present. And last but not least, I think India will have to be prepared for any kind of an situation where it needs to work for negating the impact which would be limited to its core interest, and it should try and get into the probably much more proactive diplomacy with the Middle East, with the larger community, with the larger international community, because the image of India is such that it has that ability, because people are talking about, there is a narrative that India needs to start its role as the peace builder. Now that is a big question, and how if these things are going to shape up, we'll need to wait and see. But yes, I think on this note, I would like to conclude this session of Russia-Ukraine war and its impact and implications for the Middle Eastern region. We have yet to see the larger implications as far as the Middle East is concerned. Thank you so much.